Okay, and good afternoon. Welcome to Game Changers with Fabian Lyon. I am deeply honored to welcome as guest Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of the Honorable and great Marcus Garvey. And Dr. Julius Garvey, thank you so much for coming on Game Changers today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. And Dr. Garvey, your father, his name speaks for itself, just in terms of the impact that he had, not only, in Jamaica where he was born, obviously, but coming to America, and after that, just the global impact that he had, the vision that he had to, unite and connect people of African descent, empowering them. And I just want to ask you straight off the bat, how do you feel just being the son of one of the sons of such a legendary figure?
Well, we've gone through that. I'm no longer in my teens and growing up, etc. So, we're adults, pretty much, and with my own identity, etc. And so looking at him as an international figure is something that I've grown into.
Mm-hmm.
I admire him as being the major Pan-African figure of the first half of the 20th century with the organization that he created, the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League. It was fantastic. Everything that he did from 1914 onwards to his death in 1940 was game-changing.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon the pun.
No, not at all. I like the pun.
So then I guess you're in the same vein as a game changer. And now in the 2020s, in the first part of the 21st century. So the game is the same, and it still needs changing. So I'm happy to be here with you to discuss the work of my dad, if you will, because he laid a foundation in terms of the philosophy of Pan-Africanism, in terms of encouraging us to look back at our history. So the people without a knowledge of their history, origins, and culture is like a tree without roots. And he told us that we had to liberate our minds from mental slavery, because while others may free the body, none but ourselves could free the mind. So those were two sort of foundational pillars of his. And, as John Henry Clark would say, history is the lens through which we look at the future. So we have to understand our history, and that tells us who we have been in the past. And then using that lens, we can know where we're going in the future. But unless we liberate our minds, then we won't be able to chart the future properly. Right. So he was a game changer from that perspective.
Wow, that is so powerful, Dr. Garvey. And he's been affectionately called as a Black Moses in terms of just being able to unite and bring bring people together and have them not be dependent on entities that were kind of founded and funded by colonialism. How does that make you feel that he did this in 1914 in that area, where right now, considering the times that we're in, but he did this at a time, it seems kind of really mind-boggling that he was able to pull this off at such a period of time in this country, no less.
Well, I think times and situations bring out the necessity for certain people. Like you mentioned, Moses, certainly he was a man of his times. I don't know much about his historicity. We hear a lot about him, but I don't know whether he really was a historical person or a fictional person. Mm-hmm. But in that sense of leading his people to the promised land, basically, the ideology and the framework. He always spoke about the redemption of Africa and the redemption of African people. So basically what he was about was the reconstruction of African civilization. And as you know, Bob Marley's song, Redemption Song, right. And it also has in there, liberate your minds from mental slavery. Those are all, a Garvey perspective and Garvey words. which, Bob was able to put to music and to poetry, if you will, and song. So that was his message, to liberate us from enslavement and liberate us from colonialism. Because as after 1884, 1885, Africa and the rest of the African world, if you will, was divided up at the Berlin Conference, and we all became colonies. So we went from the plantation of slavery to the colonization. And in a place like the United States, where you'd move from the south to the north, you went from the plantation to ghettoization. And that's, in a sense, similar to where we still are, because, shall we say, the economic handles of most of the countries that were previously under colonialism, that they have not been changed. For example, if you look at France and the Francophone countries in Africa, more than $500–600 billion of wealth goes out of those African countries to feed France. And it's ridiculous. Here you have, countries in Africa which, are poor, but basically rich in resources, but they're feeding a country like France, which claims to about equality and fraternity and so on, which is total nonsense. I mean, it's just propaganda. They're still milking Africa, and it's still a colonial situation, but now it's called globalization. So we went from slavery to colonialism to globalization. And from an agricultural base to we're sharecroppers, if you will, certainly in the United States, to an industrial base, we're again on the periphery, and we're ghetto residents, if you will, on the margins of the riches of capitalism. And the riches are riches that we produce, either through unpaid physical labor or through our resources being taken from us and turned into wealth. So, the condition hasn't changed a lot. I mean, if you look at it on the surface, it's a prettier picture on the surface. But when you look, the foundation of it is still the same, whereby a few countries in the West, European countries, by and large, are still, raping, if you will, the resources of Africa and African people. And of course, now others have joined in, whether it's the Arabs or it's the Chinese or the Indians, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a bit of a feeding frenzy, as Africa is the richest continent in the world, but also with the poorest people. So we need another game changer, Mr. Lyon.
Okay. All right. And Dr. Garvey, I wanted to ask you, what would you like to see? How can we all, in our own small way, kind of carry on what your great father started in terms of this movement, maybe even in our own household? In what way can we do this to kind of push this along, even in our own way, and kind of grow together in that movement, even today?
Yeah, I think, that's very interesting in terms of that statement, because, we need to carry on the legacy of Garvey from the perspective that it was a liberating message, and we still need a liberation, and we need to be liberated towards, a United States of Africa and towards a total Pan-African concept of unity among all African people. So, what we need to do is certainly on a personal level, to begin that personal transformation of liberating our minds. And again, it begins with history. Because you see, one of the problems that we have had in the enslavement of our minds is that we believe that the current system that we're living in is somehow utopia, and it's the best system that we can have. It's not true. It's a faulty system, and it's been a faulty system for more than 500 years. We can see, man's inhumanity to man has become profitable, but that's not the way we were supposed to be. Whether you believe in a divine, providence or provenance or not, I mean, clearly we should not be killing each other and, in a sense, cannibalizing each other. Even animals don't do that. I mean, animals only feed when they're hungry. But we as humans, at least certain segments of us, feed on other segments of our human race, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And that is untenable over time. And we can see the systems breaking down now in terms of, for example, climate change, which is a product of the industrialization process and the contamination of the air and of the ground and of the water, et cetera, et cetera. And the various systems of governance we see, being compromised, the so-called democracy here, when we saw what happened on January the 6th in the United States and so on. And you see it around the world where the far right is growing up, and we have this divide in terms of one group against another group.
Mm-hmm.
The rich against the poor, the left against the right, the Democrats against the Republicans, and ism, schism,
Mm-hmm.
and but that's not the way it's supposed to be. I mean, we're one race, we're one universe. We're supposed to be able to work in some kind of cooperative manner. So we need to get that type of understanding individually, and then move that into the collective situation where there's cooperative work and responsibility, and there's cooperative economics. So that within the family, we're able to relate to each other appropriately, male, female, father, daughter, or father, son, mother, daughter, mother, son, and so on, as well as with neighbors, as well as on the job. Because again, we're a family, and if we're united, then we really can do anything that we want to do in terms of our creative abilities. And again, once we remove the blindfolds in terms of not thinking that this is the ultimate system that we are here to propagate. It is not. It's a false system. It's a system that's raping the earth. It's a system that's been that has committed genocide. I mean, millions of people have been killed. Species are dying. Forests are dying. Waters are being polluted. The seas are filled up with garbage. So this is not a system that can continue. It's not a sustainable system. Mm-hmm. So we then have the responsibility to walk away from that and create a sustainable system. Mm-hmm. And we have to do that, individually and collectively. In terms of how do we handle our garbage? Are we buying nonsense? Bling, 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 bling. Are we contributing to the pollution of the world, both mentally and physically? Are we manifesting our true spiritual nature as human beings? So these are the things that we can move towards individually and then reach out to others, collectively to transform the world. And that's what's needed at the present time, is a transformation. We need a new paradigm, not the European paradigm of scientific materialism, because there's more to the universe than matter. Mm-hmm. By far, the greatest part of the universe is the spiritual part of the universe that you can't measure. Right. Because matter itself is less than 5% of the universe, mm-hmm. at least in terms of what we know about matter. So again, it's a false system, and it picks out things that are measurable and say, okay, let's maximize this, and this is the universe. But that's using blindfolds, blinkers, and it's ignoring all of the other aspects of life that's not measurable, but can be experienced by the individual, mm-hmm. you see, which is your own innate consciousness or spiritual nature. And that's who we are, and that's how we're different from animals. Animals are not capable of being conscious of consciousness, and not able of being able to choose, and not able to have a free will. And this is by design. That's who we are. So we have to exercise that. Well, then we have to use that responsibility in how we relate to each other and how we relate to the environment. And that's where we have to go. And so it's a system of growing up as individuals and growing up as a society as we relate to each other and put in place different systems that are sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And if you're just joining us here on Game Changers with Fabian Lyon, we are honored to have as guest Dr. Julius Garvey, the son of Marcus Moziah Garvey, the Honorable Marcus Moziah Garvey, the first national hero designated as such in Jamaica. And Dr. Garvey, I had a question for you. If you could just maybe take us back to your childhood and having your father around, what kind of stands out for you? What kind of memories stand out for you with your father?
Well, basically, I was very young in terms of memories of my father, because my father died in 1940 when I was 7 years of age. Now, we had moved from Jamaica to England in 1935. So I was, 2 or 3 at that time. So my memories are childhood memories of being in England, living in an apartment and so on. And my father, in the living room playing with us, myself and my older brother, and, taking us to the movies, etc., playing in the backyard, that type of memory, not anything in terms of discussing politics or what have you.
Right.
And then we ended up leaving England in about 1938 because my brother was developing arthritis in his knee, and it developed a contracture. And the doctors told us that we had to go back to a warm climate, otherwise the arthritis would get worse and he'd be crippled. So my mother brought us back to Jamaica. So the last time I saw him, actually, I was 5 years of age. So the memories are childhood memories, But my mother reinforced my understanding and knowledge of my father. She never remarried, and she brought up both myself and my brother, in the image of our father, if you will. So she always told us who he was, what he was trying to accomplish, and the kind of, a person that he was. So that reinforced, my childhood memories. And then as I grew, then I read more about him, et cetera, et cetera. But there are few childhood memories, and most of them then are memories, if you will, given to me by my mother in terms of the early work that he did and they did together.
Okay. Is there something that we don't know about your great father? Is there something that maybe is underreported as far that even is going to add to his legacy, to his being? Because I personally feel, and this is a personal opinion, that he has not been nearly appreciated enough, as crazy as that might sound. I think your father has been overlooked as far as being the founder of the civil rights movement. I think that gets brushed aside or is not talked about enough. And how do you feel about that aspect of your father, as far as all that he has done? And he had so many things going on. He wasn't just civil rights, but he wore so many hats and did it so greatly. If you could just speak on the appreciation for your father.
Yes, I concur in terms of what you stated. Is that it's difficult for many people to look at a Black man and appreciate his dignity and the fullness of his genius, because of the poison that has infected the minds of white people and many Black people. We can't even look at our own people and give them due credit, because in our own minds, we don't think that we deserve credit as full human beings. But my father was a genius, and he was the first multi-genius that we know of in terms of the diaspora, in every aspect, both political, entrepreneurial, organizational, literary, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that I think people don't understand enough about him is the whole concept of the spiritual nature of man and the necessity for transformation that is required. Like he said, God and nature first made us, what we are. And then out of our own creative genius, we make ourselves what we need to be. So he was that kind of creative genius, a man who created himself. As you know, he came from, St. Anne's Bay in the north coast of Jamaica, from, a peasant family, agricultural family. His father was a mason. His mother was a small farmer, making things to take to market, etc. So he had no major background in terms of foundation. But obviously he had his own genius, and then he was able to transform himself, which if you look at his life over time, I mean, he did this from the time when he was apprenticed to his godfather as a printer, and on up. I mean, he became very, very familiar with words, with a dictionary in his pocket. He'd learn 4 and 5 words a day. and make sentences out of them. As he grew up, he would go to, debating societies and so on, to develop his skills in terms of being able to communicate, from the perspective of a speaker, to hold an audience and so on. And then his travels, his early travels, he was a man who was soaking up information. He wasn't just looking for work, but he traveled, first of all, in Jamaica, he traveled, then he traveled throughout the Caribbean, went to Costa Rica, he went to Panama, he went to several other Central American countries, came back to Jamaica, then he went to England, he traveled throughout Europe, then he came back to Jamaica, then he came to the United States. Within a year, he traveled through 38 states here in the United States. So here was a man who soaked up information, but he soaked it up not just from books, although he read extensively. And in England, he took courses at Birkbeck University. He would watch the speakers at Parliament in England, and he had an extensive library where he was a journalist with Muhammad Ali. So he was a man who soaked up the word, but he soaked up personal experience. And then he was able to transform those experiences into, how he saw things. In other words, he was able to synthesize, what he saw. So this was the creativity of the man himself, and come up with a program and a platform that he felt now could transform African people. He said, everywhere I go, I see African people at the bottom of the ladder. I see no presidents. I see no men of big affairs. I don't see them owning anything. And then he had his epiphany. And he said, well, I must do something about this. So he had a communication from God, if you will, that this was his mandate. And he had been preparing himself, all his life for this. So then he was able to manifest that, most appropriately in terms of the current situation. And if you read his work, you see he was a master of everything, the history and the geography of his time, the politics of his time, and to be able to appreciate what came before his time in terms of African civilization, and then understand that the principles were there historically in terms of African civilizations, Kemet, both Egypt and Ethiopia, Nubia and Kemet. And then those principles now simply needed to be modernized. And if you look at what he created organizationally and in terms of the economic plan that he had, you could call it state capitalism, which is what the Chinese have now, and how they're moving so fast, and how they've brought more than half of their population, 500 million people out of poverty in 50 years. This was exactly Marcus Garvey's plan. The major industries would be run in a central fashion. Everybody can have their mom and pop and small and medium-sized businesses, but it was the government of the institution then that was going to run everything, even though everybody would share in that. So wealth was created for the people, not out of the people for a few people. So, it's all there, and all we have to do is understand it and then work with it. And I think one of the major things about him, which again is underappreciated, is his spiritual understanding. And he was able to transform Christianity, if you will, into something that African people could be comfortable with, because he understood that clearly Jesus, if he existed, could not have been a blonde, blue-eyed person in terms of where he was supposed to have been born and grew up. All those people were brown people. And he could trace the genealogy back to basically an African or a Near Eastern ancestry, which, as he said, had the blood of all races running through his veins. And then he transformed this whole understanding of God. God is not a person. God is a spirit. So you don't have to worship that spirit through the spectacles of somebody else. In other words, don't put up a picture of a white God. If you want to put up a picture, worship it through the spectacles of Ethiopia, which is put up a picture of a black God. And same thing with Christ. And, and then he said the essence of Christianity was love. And that is what you really needed to practice. And then where you need to find God was in yourself. And he had a poem about that in terms of his own temple. He considered the body a temple, and you would go in there and communicate with your source. So he did all of these things, which are very, very transformational and are not appreciated. People talk about Black theology. He's the original Black theologist of the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned.
No doubt, Dr. Garvey. And I wanted to ask you, as far as how do we have a tighter embrace of Africa and our roots? Just growing up in Jamaica, partly myself, it seemed like we were very fond of the monarchy, of European ideologies, but no such near affection for Africa and our roots. Is that a concern of yours? Has that been a concern of yours? And how do we move towards a tighter embrace of Africa and our roots?
Well, clearly, Europe and Europeans have had a jump start of, at least 500 years, but even longer. But, they burnt all of our books and rewrote history in the 17th and 18th century to write us out of history, as if to say civilization started with Greece. But that's a joke because, Homo sapiens started 200,000 years ago, and it started in Africa. So all of history really is African history. Right. In terms of human history, it's African history. That's motherland. We populated the world from the first human beings. We went all around the world. Same thing with the first civilization in Nubia and Kemet. And then we sent our civilization all around the world. And it's there, it's documented, although it's hard to find it because so many of the books have been burnt. Over time, they burnt our books in Egypt, they burnt our books in Carthage, they burnt our books in Spain. At the time of the Inquisition, as you know, the Moors and the Arabs there brought civilization to Europe and brought Europe out of the Dark Ages. But then they persisted and became strong, and that's when the moved to conquer the world, so to speak, in the 15th century, 1492, and onwards, with the beginning of the enslavement of African people and stealing the Americas and Australia and so on as continents. So, it's a matter of education, and it's tragic that we have not revised, not only revised the books, but revised our educational systems and protocols. And if you look at a place like Jamaica, history is not compulsory. Now, how can you build a country when you're not teaching your citizens the history of the country? How are they going to be citizens when they don't know how they got there in the first place? They don't know the struggles, that took place. They don't know the brutality that took place. They don't know how they got there. So you can't then be a good citizen if you don't know how you got to the place where you are. So I mean that's simple, and it's the same thing with the young people in Jamaica. And when you don't teach the character and the genius of a person like Marcus Garvey to the kids, then they don't have an ideal to shape themselves after. Who are they going to be like? Is it the royal family? I mean, because the crown is we're still part of the crown in terms of the Commonwealth, etc. We're not a republic. So we have these ideals that are still, European. We have a curriculum that is still European, or at least is not focused on in terms of who we are. And then we look at what the result. And then, which is a country that is not really working, for the people at the present time. It's dependent on tourists, it's dependent on aid, etc. And of course, it's dependent on the remuneration coming from, citizens who have gone abroad. But it can't stand on its own 2 feet because it doesn't have an understanding of who it is and how it got there. Right. And this is true all across, not just the diaspora, but all across the continent. Because again, if you look at many of the leaders of African countries, where are they educated? Many of them are educated at European or American or English universities. So they absorb all of this stuff about, rule Britannia and how Great Britain was and so on and so forth, as if to say that is our history. That's not our history. Our history is longer than European history, which may go back, let's say, 2,000 years. Our history goes back a minimum of 15,000 years, or if you listen to the Egyptians, it goes back 40,000 years. So, you know, this is what frees our minds. And we have not accepted that in terms of our scholars. You know, they believe, you know, gardening around or going around in the field of the European scholarship. No, there's a whole vast world out there that you should use your intellect in terms of your own scholarship to unearth some of these treasures that are there that have been buried. Because, you know, even when they're burnt a lot, there's still a lot more that's buried that can be unearthed that would serve us as a people in terms of us knowing who we are. Mm-hmm. So our scholarship is lacking, our educational system is lacking, and that's that's the result that we have, that we don't know ourselves and we idolize others instead of having our own ideas and working towards our own improvement and our own perfection.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Garvey, I wanted to ask you, how disappointed are you? I heard some of it, maybe I just want to be sure, that your father so long ago laid the blueprint for this kind of economic freedom, you know, for people of African descent to really come together and join forces financially. And yet, so many of us are still dependent on others. How disappointed are you that this is where we are right now? And do you feel that any single person has picked up the baton from your father and carry that on such an epic level?
No, there's no single person that has done that. You know, there are individuals, you know, some known to me, some unknown, who are, you know, doing their best in terms of carrying out, you know, that type of approach. But like so many things that we try to do for the betterment of ourselves, the system tries to crush it every time someone rises up. As you know, with people such as Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba and so many others over time, you know, they have been killed or they have been marginalized in the same way they did to my dad with false charges and imprisonment. So this has prevented the development, and I think you see it now, for example, in Ethiopia, where they're trying to say that the central government of Ethiopia somehow should be nice to these people in Tigray, which is a breakaway province that wants to secede from the central government, whereas they would never allow that in their own countries. In the United States, if Texas wanted to secede, the army would be down there wiping out the Texans. So why is it that they now say that the central government of Ethiopia, you know, should not respond to the mutiny, if you will, of the forces there in Tigray province? That's because they want a weak government, and they want the individual ethnicities, if you will, tribal ethnicities, to prosper. So you won't have a united nation. And it's the same thing with the African Union. You know, they try to prevent the African Union, the different 55 African countries, if you will, from coming together. And they do it at that level, and they do it at the individual national level. They did it in Zimbabwe, you know, and they've done it in so many African countries. You know, if you look at the Francophone countries, there have been between 10 and 15 different coups in these countries. Every time a leader gets up from Sekou Touré's days that says, look, France, leave us alone, you know, go back to France, we don't want you here. That leader is assassinated or there's a coup. You know, so it's an on and on and on and on process. But obviously, you know, over time, we're getting stronger, and over time, they're getting weaker. And I think this time of crisis in terms of COVID and the international recession or downturn economically, I think this is a period when we have another opportunity to move another step further up the ladder.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dr. Garvey. And I did just want to touch on this ceremony that's going to rightfully salute your father on August 17th, I believe, in Addis Ababa. And I understand you're going to be one of the keynote speakers there. Just maybe tell me a little bit more about this dedication to your great father.
Yeah, well, basically what we're doing is that we're creating a bronze bust of my dad. And we intend to place it at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa around the time of his birthday, which would be August the 17th. And that would be his 134th birthday. So associated with that is a trip that we're sponsoring. And it's a 12-day trip from August the 13th to August the 24th, more or less evenly divided between Ethiopia and Ghana. And it's a salute to Emperor Haile Selassie in terms of Ethiopia and to Kwame Nkrumah in terms of Ghana, because these were two great Pan Africanists and who were important in terms of the formation of the African Union, back in '63, I think it was. So we want to honor them. And from our perspective, we are going back as the sixth region, and we want the African Union to recognize us as the sixth region, and that we are important in terms of the African Union moving towards the United States of Africa. So the United States of Africa will be, in some sense, borderless, and it will include us in the diaspora as the sixth region. So this is the purpose of that trip. And of course, as we said, it honors the Pan-African perspective of my father in terms of how he outlined it and how it was picked up by people such as Kwame Nkrumah and Emperor Haile Selassie. So we hope that people who are listening will join us. They can contribute, to the cost of the bus. They can go to our website, www.marcusgarveybronze.com, www.marcusgarveybronze.com, to find out how to contribute and also to get information about the trip and the tour.
Okay, most definitely, Dr. Garvey. And I wanted to talk about you personally. I hear that fire in your voice, and it's one thing to be the son or daughter of such a great international figure, but to really talk about maybe your responsibility that you feel to carry on what your father worked so hard to do. Was it something that was just inherent in you? Talk about that journey, why you're so passionate right now about those very same things that your father talked about back in, way so far behind us.
Well, basically almost 100 years ago in that sense, 100 years ago in that sense. Well, I don't know that I feel it so much in terms of being the offspring, but, I've always grown up as an African. And I think that's probably due more to my mother than to my father, because as I mentioned, my father died when I was 7 years old and my mother brought me up. But she brought up myself and my brother as the children of, herself and my father. But it was always about Africa, and it was always that we were Africans and we had this African history. And we shaped the world in terms of our humanity and in terms of our civilizations. So, and she always, you might say, set the bar high in terms of our accomplishments, in terms of who and what we wanted to be. And this was determined to some extent by the fact that, our father was a major figure, and we certainly could not disgrace him. But we had to be the best that we could be. So we had to be the best Africans that we could be in that sense. So I was an African who was born in Jamaica, who lived for a time in England as well as Jamaica, went to school in Canada, and now I live in the United States. So it's a manifestation of my Africanness. Wherever I go, I'm an African. And over time, I've read and understood the history of Africa and the principles of Africa in terms of the African understanding of who we are as human beings. We're spiritual entities having a physical experience in a physical world, but that the non-physical world permeates the physical world, and we have to be in harmony with that. That's the concept of Ma'at. So over time, I have sought that kind of harmony within myself in terms of, mind, body, and also the harmony between myself and what's around me in terms of family, in terms of neighbors, in terms of workplace, and in terms of citizenship, in terms of nationhood. So I think that's being, extremely African, because again, it's the first understanding of our humanity, and it's a full understanding of our humanity. Our humanity is not simply an intellectual rationalization of physical sensations. I mean, that's extremely superficial, and that's just being a human animal. But our full humanity is the African understanding of who we are. And I call that African humanism. And I think that's the way we have to go. And I feel as if I'm expressing my African humanity in terms of what I do. Now, that happens to be synchronous with my father's ideas. So I don't know whether I got it from my DNA or I got it independently. But I have no problem in being Marcus Garvey's son, and at the same time being Julius Garvey.
Yes, that's profound, Dr. Garvey. I wanted to ask you just what we witnessed maybe the last year or so in terms of the racial awakening, the social justice awakening that this country experienced. What do you think? What do you think your father would say about this, and also your personal views on how far we came in that such a time, but also what we need to do to keep this pushing forward and not getting complacent with anything that has been accomplished the past couple months, for example?
Well, basically, I think you see that nothing, much has changed. Like I said, the furniture may have been changed, but we're living in the same house. Whether the house is called, slavery, or whether it's called Jim Crow, or whether it's called apartheid, or whether it's called colonialism, but whether it's called globalization. It's the same house that we're living in, and it hasn't really changed fundamentally, over time. So what my father espoused 100 years ago is valid in terms of the African people universally. And, for people to be still in 2020 struggling out there in terms of police brutality, where it's dangerous to be Black while driving, it's dangerous to be Black while running, it's dangerous to be Black while driving, it's dangerous to be Black because somebody may shoot you in your back, or simply kneel on your neck. I mean, this is ridiculous. Absolutely and totally ridiculous. I mean, to have a society that has allowed that to happen and to fester, for hundreds of years, I mean, it's just unconscionable. I think that now, with the age of communication, with the ability for millions of people to be able to see that event in real time, it is bringing about a mental awakening. And the same thing, for people to be able to see that January 6th event, where all these far right people were able to storm the Congress, almost untouched, if you will, with all kinds of complacency and acquiescence on the inside and at the highest level. I mean, for people to be able to see that in real time, I think it allows, a deeper understanding of facts, which you can't really deny, because you saw it. It's not something that was written in a book, or it's not something that, that happened in the South, or that happened 50 years ago. No, you saw it in real time. So I think now there's another awakening, if you will. And I think this happens generationally. If you look back, my dad was the 20s, 30s. Martin Luther King was and Malcolm X was the 60s. And then you had the 90s with more a revolution again. And now you're in the 20s. So it's another generation that has grown up. So that is why I think it's so important to how should I say, bring to the fore the legacy of Marcus Garvey and his ideas and the nature of his organizational structure and what he proposed for African people. Because I think that the foundation is there, the plan is there. It's just that not a lot of people, African people, are aware of it from that perspective because it's not being taught in schools or any particular place. So, we need to communicate. And, that's why I said I would speak to you and your platform. That's why we need platforms like yours in order to spread that kind of message. A lot has been happening, with WhatsApp and the internet and everything else. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to educate each other, if you will, communicate with each other and form networks so that we can then, discuss things and agree to disagree and then agree to agree so that we can move forward together and bring about the transformation that we've been talking about.
No doubt, Dr. Garvey. And another topic is this posthumous presidential pardon, exoneration of your dad. I know you've been on a mission, Dr. Garvey. I've seen some interviews. I've read a lot of articles. Please tell us about the status of that now, and how are you feeling about this whole process?
Well, a Congresswoman, Yvette Clarke, has just presented before Congress table on House Resolution, I think it's 148, relative to the exoneration of my dad. And this is something that, again, is bringing it to the fore before the Congress, which we did. We did it, President Obama in 2016. We presented a full, legal brief by a major law firm out of Washington, D.C. that dissected the trial and showed that it was illegal. There was no evidence. It was a political trial. There was perjury and so on. And we presented all that information to President Obama in 2016, but he did not act on it. Of course, we had been involved before that all the way back to 1987 when we appeared before the House Judiciary Committee. Myself and my brother, Congressman Rangel, over the years had presented different House resolutions. So it's been an ongoing, process in time. And Yvette Clarke has brought it up again. So, we support that and we will do what we can to bring that to the forefront in terms of the current administration and the current Congress. So, there are a lot of people out there who have been, contacting me, et cetera, relative to this, new movement again, or the current movement, shall we say, in terms of the exoneration of my dad.
No doubt, Dr. Garvey, and I think it's to say it's way past due is an understatement. I do want to ask you, however, what were your expectations when it was presented to President Obama? Did you have any expectations? Did the results surprise or disappoint you?
Well, basically, yes, we had expectations. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it because we knew our case was valid. We had a Black president, and we sort of assumed that he would understand that he was standing on the shoulders of other people who had gone before in terms of the battle for human rights and for civil rights here in the United States. So we were disappointed when not only did he not act on it, but we got no particular response from him, personally. And that's not ego on my part, but I just think it at least deserved a response. But we got neither.
Okay, all right. Dr. Garvey, what Garveyism, how do you view Garveyism? With all that you've said, is there one focal point about Garveyism? It seems so global, and it for your father to undertake this, knowing what was coming his way in terms of resistance. And I asked you earlier why nobody has taken up baton, and you said, well, they've been short-circuited and was sabotaging. But at the same time, your father did all he did 100 years ago plus. So if he found a way back then, I find it just kind of dumbfounded that nobody has really stepped to the fore and kind of, as I said, just taken some of that blueprint at least and ran with it.
Well, I think you need to look at the system closely and see what happens to people who stray outside of the system. And this is true for Black or it's true for white. That if you fight the system gets rid of you. First, they'll try to seduce you. They'll offer you money or position or what have you. Then they'll threaten you. Then they'll try to destroy your character. And if they can't do that, then they'll eliminate you. And you can see it with Marcus Garvey. You can see it with Malcolm X. You can see it with Martin Luther King. And you can just go down the line with so many leaders that I've mentioned in terms of Africa, over and over, whether it's a Steve Biko and so on in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela and so on, and it's all over the world. I mean, it's genocide and, it's population control. What's his name wrote a book? What's the name of that guy? Something about the hitman, and he was telling you all about how he has purposely subverted governments so that they would allow economic penetration of the favored companies, U.S. companies, and so on. The big corporative entities into the different countries. They would destroy different leaders, whether it's Salvador Allende and all these other people. We're seeing it throughout Central America. We're seeing it with Cuba. We're seeing it with Venezuela. Look at the amount of hardship that these people have suffered simply because they've not wanted to go along with the American hegemonic perspective. So, the degree of enforcement of the current system is severe. And if you look at what has taken place in the Middle East with Iran and so on, I mean, Iraq, it's mind-boggling. If you try to put yourself in the minds of these people, I mean, you realize it's a horrible place to be, but you put yourself on the other side. You have to understand that they'll come for you whenever you present a threat to their well-being, which is, basically, you might say, owning the world and telling the world what to do. That has been the trajectory of Europe and certainly the power structure of Europe over the last 500 years in terms of their industrial development and their materialism and their globalization of their economic system.
Well, Dr. Garvey, I just want to say a deep gratitude to you, your father, your entire family. I know just growing up in Jamaica, Marcus Garvey was our Black Moses. He was our royalty. He was our monarchy. And just to have you on this show, Game Changers, and you in yourself are a game changer. And I just want to express my deepest gratitude to carrying on all the work that your father, the great world vision that he had. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your father. Thank you for your great family, sir. And all the best with with the exoneration and also the great ceremony that they have planned in Ethiopia later this year, sir.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Fabian.
Yes, sir.
It's great to be with a game changer.
Yes, sir. And same likewise, sir. Hope we talk soon again.
Okay, take care.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Garvey. Bye-bye.